Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur ki jai. Prem se kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivas Adi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinath Shamakunda Radha Kund Giri Govardhan ki jai. Vrindavan Dham ki jai. Mayapur Navadvip Dham ki jai. Gangamayi Yamunamayi ki jai. Bhakti Devi Tulsi Maharani ki jai. Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. Gaura Premanandi Hari Hari Bol. All glories to the assembled devotees. Hare Krishna. All glories to the assembled devotees. Hare Krishna. All glories to the assembled devotees. Hare Krishna. All glories to the lotus feet of Sri Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Hare Krishna. Thank you everyone for joining. We continue our study of Srimad Bhagavatam. We are in the second canto, the 6th chapter, entitled the Purusha Sukta Confirmed, and today's text is number 20. That bigger for some of you. Probably on the mobile, it doesn't look very, too much. There we go. Okay. Padastrayo bahishchasan aprajanam ya ashramaha antastrilokyastvaparo grihamedho brihadvrataha. Padastrayo bahishchasan aprajanam ya ashramaha antastrilokyastvaparo grihamedho brihadvrataha. Padastrayo bahishchasan aprajanam ya ashramaha antastrilokyastvaparo grihamedho brihadvrataha. Please chant.
Padastrayo bahishchasan aprajanam ya ashrama antastrilokyastvaparo gruhamedha bhratvrata.
Hare Krishna. Padastrayo bahishchasan aprajanam ya ashramaha antastri lokyastva aparo griha medho abrihad vrataha.
Padastrayo Bahishchasan Aprajanam Ya Ashramaha Antastrilokyastra Aparo Grahamedho Abrahad Brata. Hare Krishna.
Padastrayo bahishchasan aprajanam ya ashrama antastrilokyasva paro grihamedo brihat prata.
Anyone else? Okay. Synonyms. Padatraya, the cosmos of 3/4 of the Lord's energy. Bahihi, thus situated beyond. Cha, and for all. Asan, were. Aprajanam, of those who are not meant for rebirth. Yea, those. Ashramaha, status of life. Antaha, within. Trilokyaha, of the three worlds. To, but. Aparaha, others. Grihamedaha, attached to family life. Abrihat vrataha, without strictly following a vow of celibacy. Translation by Abhaycharan Arvind Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. The spiritual world, which consists of 3/4 of the Lord's energy, is situated beyond this material world, and it is especially meant for those who will never be reborn. Others, who are attached to family life and who do not strictly follow celibacy vows, must live within the 3 material worlds. Purport. The climax of the system of Varnashrama Dharma, or Sanatan Dharma, is clearly expressed here in this particular verse of Srimad Bhagavatam. The highest benefit that can be awarded to a human being is to train him to be detached from sex life, particularly because it is only due to sex indulgence that the conditioned life of material existence continues birth after birth. Human civilization in which there is no control of sex life is a 4th-class civilization, because in such an atmosphere, there is no liberation of the soul encaged in the material body. Birth, death, old age, and disease are related to the material body, and they have nothing to do with the spirit soul. But as long as the bodily attachment for sensual enjoyment is encouraged, the individual spirit soul is forced to continue the repetition of birth and death on account of the material body, which is compared to garments subjected to the laws of deterioration. In order to award the highest benefit of human life, the Varnashrama system trains the follower to adopt the vow of celibacy, beginning from the order of brahmachari. The brahmachari life is for students who are educated to follow strictly the vow of celibacy. Youngsters who have no taste of sex life can easily follow the vow of celibacy, and once fixed in the principle of such a life, one can very easily continue to the highest perfectional stage, attaining the kingdom of the 3/4 energy of the Lord. It is already explained that in the cosmos of 3/4 energy of the Lord, there is neither death nor fear, and one is full of the blissful life of happiness and knowledge. A householder attached to family life can easily give up such life of sex indulgence if he has been trained in the principles of life of a brahmachari. A householder is recommended to quit home at the end of 50 years. Panchashordvam vanam vrajet, and live a life in the forest. Then, being fully detached from family affection, he may accept the order of renunciation as a sannyasi, fully engaged in the service of the Lord. Any form of religious principles in which the followers are trained to pursue the vow of celibacy is good for the human being, because only those who are trained in that way can end the miserable life of material existence. The principles of nirvana, as recommended by Lord Buddha, are also meant for ending the miserable life of material existence. And this process, in the highest degree, is recommended here in the Srimad Bhagavatam. With clear perception of ideal perfection, although basically there is no difference between the processes of Buddhists, Shankarites, and Vaishnavites. For promotion to the highest status of perfection, namely freedom from birth and death, anxiety and fearlessness, not one of these processes allows the follower to break the vow of celibacy. The householders and persons who have deliberately broken the vow of celibacy cannot enter into the kingdom of deathlessness. The pious householder, or fallen yogis, or the fallen transcendentalists, can be promoted to the higher planets within the material world, 1/4 of the energy of the Lord, but they will fail to enter into the kingdom of deathlessness. Abrihadvratas are those who have broken the vow of celibacy. The vanaprasthas, or those retired from family life, and the sannyasis, or the renounced persons, cannot break the vow of celibacy if they want success in the process. The brahmacharis, vanaprasthas, and sannyasis do not intend to take rebirth, upraja, nor are they meant for secretly indulging in sex life. Such a fall down by the spiritualist may be compensated by another chance for human life in good families of learned brahmanas or of rich mendicants for another term of elevation, but the best thing is to attain the highest perfection of deathlessness as soon as the human form of life is attained. Otherwise, the whole policy of human life will prove to be a total failure. Lord Chaitanya was very strict in advising his followers in this matter of celibacy. One of his personal attendants, Chota Haridas, was severely punished by Lord Chaitanya because of his failure to observe the vow of celibacy. For a transcendentalist, therefore, who at all wants to be promoted to the kingdom beyond material miseries, it is worse than suicide to deliberately indulge in sex life, especially in the renounced order of life. Sex life in the renounced order of life is the most perverted form of religious life, and such a misguided person can only be saved if, by chance, he meets a pure devotee. Today's translation again. The spiritual world, which consists of 3/4 of the Lord's energy, is situated beyond this material world, and it is especially meant for those who will never be reborn. Others, who are attached to family life and who do not strictly follow celibacy vows, must live within the 3 material worlds. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Himate Bhaktivedanta Swami Namane Namaste Sarasvate Devi Gauravanichari Nirvishesha Shunyabari Pashtachari Shidhane Om Ajnana Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Vanchakalpatrubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Hitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavibhyo Namaha. Hare Krishna. So, in this chapter, as well as the previous chapter, we have learned that the material world is made up of nothing other than the Supreme Lord. We also learned that its purpose, the purpose for this material world, is for the reawakening of our dormant love of God. So we read about the various different planetary systems and what happens in each of these planetary systems, what their purpose are, what the activities are, what the qualifications are. And hopefully we have concluded that even with varieties of occasional and hard-earned temporary pleasures, this material world is a place of suffering and we do not belong here. Hopefully that's the conclusion we came up with. So that's the material world. That's the 1/4 of the Lord's energy. Now, very recently, we just started learning about, or more about, the other 3/4 of the Supreme Lord's energy. That's the spiritual world, right? There's no fear, there's no death, no anxieties of old age and disease, etc., right? So this actually sounds like a place we would want to go to, right? There's eternality, there's full knowledge, complete bliss, right? We've seen the brochure, we love it. We're ready to relocate. and we're ready to sign up. Where do I sign up, right? Now, it's true that when we were reading about the heavenly planets, both the upper and the subterranean, we were a little distracted. We thought, okay, yeah, that sounds like, something that sounds like a nice neighborhood that I can, enjoy. But upon further examination, we've understood that the cost is way too high and the terms of the lease are unacceptable, right? Because we're eternal beings and we demand eternal pleasure, right? We don't want to work so hard just to attain some heavenly pleasures that are just going to fade away anyway, right? That's not our style. So we've come to terms with that. We understand, okay, that's unacceptable. But after hearing about this 3/4 of energy of, this neighborhood, it sounds absolutely perfect. It's the exact thing we're looking for. It's not just one of those, starter homes where you want to set up and eventually you're going to move on anyway. No, this is it. This is your forever home. We're ready to commit. We need to know, okay, what's the next step? How do we get into this neighborhood, right? And so in today's verse, we learn about one of the prerequisite qualifications of relocating to this 3/4 section, right, to the right side of the tracks. And that the prerequisite qualification is, quote, strictly following celibacy vows. Now, this is a non-negotiable term. There's no loophole. No amount of money or other sort of bribe will bend the rules to get us into the spiritual world. It's compulsory, obligatory, mandatory. There's just no way around it. I want to say this in as many ways as I possibly can to make that point clear, right? Because we have a tendency to try to find some sort of loophole, some sort of way to bend the rules in order to, get what we want without giving up something else that we also want. From today's purport, Srila Prabhupada said, the highest benefit that can be awarded to a human being is to train him to be detached from sex life, particularly because it is only due to sex indulgence that the conditioned life of material existence continues birth after birth, right? So Srila Prabhupada's pointing out that the only reason that we are here in this material world, the 1/4 Lord's energy, where there's endless suffering and occasional relief from that suffering in the form of some temporary enjoyment, the only reason we're here is because sex indulgence. So at this point, before we go too far, I want to make it clear that although celibacy is a requirement to get into the spiritual world, it's not necessarily a ticket. So just because one is celibate, it doesn't mean you're going to attain God's kingdom, but it is a requirement. So that's an important thing to point out. So it's not that our goal is just to be celibate and then automatically we'll return to God's kingdom. No, that's required, but there's a lot more there's a lot more to it. It's not the only thing. I want to talk a little bit about this because especially lately, obviously this is a conversation that's always happening because we're here in this material world. We're attached to sex life in some form, whether it's gross or subtle. In some form, we are attached to enjoying and controlling the situation around us, right? And the epitome of this is sex life. So this is there's actually one time Srila Prabhupada and his disciples were walking in a very industrial area. I think it was near some docks, and there was these big ships and big factories, and this very large scale operation, right? And Srila Prabhupada asked his disciples, "What is this? What does this represent?" And so some of the disciples said, "Okay, this is ugra karma, Srila Prabhupada. This industrious need to accumulate wealth." And he said, "Okay, but something more." And they're giving out other ideas of what it could be. And Srila Prabhupada said, "This is sex life." And the devotees were sort of confused. They're looking at these big buildings and big ships and big cranes and things like that. And they're like, how is this sex life, right? But Srila Prabhupada explained that all of this is done. The reason that these industrious people have this drive, this motivation to do these things, to create this industry, is so that they can enjoy better sex life, right? So they can maintain what they have and hopefully gain more, right? This is what drives everyone. So even when we see, basically anything, this is what moves the world, and we can observe this. So because this is a fact, uh, it's an ongoing debate whether or not, among religionists and just people in general, whether or not sex is even a bad thing, right? Do we actually necessarily have to give it up in order to attain God's kingdom, right? And in today's verse, it answers that question. Absolutely, we do. But we see in many traditions, even our own, we see that people are having this debate and sort of trying to bend the rules in one way or another. And so I'll tell a little story about a personal experience I had with this, and then we'll talk about it in great detail. So I've had a friend that I've known since kindergarten. We were very close since kindergarten, and then we lost touch after high school for many years, I think 17 years, and somehow we reconnected. And when we reconnected, we started talking about, how our lives went. So naturally, I'm telling her about Krishna consciousness and her experience with religion prior to having this discussion with me, as well as my experience prior to meeting the devotees, is that religionists tend to have this idyllic vision of what they want to be, but then they also have their base desires of what they want to be. And so they tend to compromise what they really want, the spirituality, and bring it down to their material level and make adjustments just so that they can get away with doing, fulfilling their or trying to fulfill their base material desires, but in the name of religion, right? And so she's observed this. I also observed that when I was young, and that's what turned me off to religion, is that these people are preaching something very high, but they're actually not paying attention to it. They're adjusting it just to suit their personal needs, and it's hypocritical. It's not good. It's exploitative. It's all the bad things, right? As Srila Prabhupada pointed out in the purport, if you are a true spiritualist, a religionist, and are a renunciate, to then go back into this, this is the worst. This is the worst thing. So when I started telling her about Krishna consciousness and how it's a no compromise philosophy, that these are the rules, and this is how you can attain it, and we don't bend those rules for anything. They're there. It's a science. Then she became interested. Prior to that, she fancied herself an atheist because it's not that she had a problem with God necessarily. She had a problem with God's followers because they didn't do what they were supposed to do, right? But they still acted as if they were going to attain the highest goal, even though they weren't doing what they were supposed to be doing. And so once she found out about this philosophy that's uncompromising, she actually started becoming impressed, right? And she started understanding, okay, now this is a religion that I can actually take seriously because they're not trying to adjust it to suit their needs, right? And one day, this friend of mine came to a festival, and there were other devotees there, and so they were talking about Krishna consciousness. And somehow the regulative principles, the subject of the regulative principles came up, of which she was impressed with, by the way. And these devotees, they said to her, oh, and they thought they were doing her a favor by trying to, they figured she's new, she shouldn't have to worry about, the strictness of all these things. And so they presented to her, they said, in the beginning, it doesn't really matter so much. So many people are still engaging in these activities. So basically don't worry about it. Don't let it sway you from keeping interest in this. And it actually did the exact opposite to her. She understood that, oh, these people are just like every other religionist. They're saying it's not actually important. It's not something that you have to worry about, right? So this topic went from being something that she was impressed with because it was presented in a way that this is what we strictly follow, to now someone, the devotees their intention was to uh, make the process look a little less rigid so that it's more accessible. But really what they did was they actually turned her off to it. Now she's still semi-favorable, of course, but it just she figures now that, okay, just like every other religion, most of the people don't actually follow it. So it's not really that impressive. Now, I will point out at this point that not everybody is like me and my friend, who are very much impressed with uncompromising spirit like that. This movement is made for everyone. Srila Prabhupada built a house in which the whole world could live. And so some people, they don't appreciate and they're not ready for such extreme lifestyle changes. And so for them, it is comforting to know that in the beginning, when you're first coming in contact with Krishna consciousness, you don't have to worry about it so much. You don't have to, you don't have to shave your head, move into the temple, never have sex again as soon as you start finding out about Krishna consciousness. There is a transition for most people, right? So it's a valid point that these devotees, they were trying, they meant well. And it's a valid point that there is a scope, some range for understanding this prohibition in a healthy way and gradually getting to that ideal standard. But it has to be done in a very, very specific way. So not only in these other religious movements, but even in our own, I have noticed the example I had just gave, and then also many more, of devotees sort of skewing the rule to try to make either themselves feel better or someone they're preaching to feel better, and it completely backfiring, right? And so what we need to do, right, as I mentioned, the Krishna consciousness movement is meant for everyone. And so naturally there are some concessions that are given, especially for neophytes. It's not that you, like I said, you just, shave your head, move into the temple, and all of a sudden you're a monk, right? And you've forgotten all about, your base desires. That's not generally how it goes, right? Most people can't do that. Some people try to do it that way, then they end up leaving. Eventually, whether it's in this life or another life, they come back because there's no loss or diminution on this path. But if we try to give up these desires prematurely, it's called Palgul Vairagya. It means that we're falsely renunciating the activity, but we're still mentally focusing on it. And so eventually we go to try to enjoy, right? And so for that reason, there needs to be some concessions, right? Because this is where we are, this is where we want to be. It seems like an unobtainable goal, but in the meantime, there is a process by which we can follow to attain that goal, right? So when we talk about these concessions with people and with our, and trying to talk ourselves into it as well, we have to be very careful not to deviate from the Shastras and the Acharyas, right? And we have to be very careful to put proper focus on the goal. We cannot change the standard. We can't come up with a plan. So what we can do, we can come up with a plan to gradually reach the high standard, but we can't replace it, modify it, ignore it, etc. The standard is there. It's essential, and we have to be clear about that. Otherwise, what we're doing is basically we have counterfeit tickets to the spiritual world, right? We think that we're getting to the spiritual world, but it's not a valid ticket. It's a counterfeit. It's a copy because we haven't qualified ourselves, right? So what we have to understand is, yes, the standard may seem unobtainable. It may be very high. We may not be ready for it, but we are ready to start the process. So the concessions should be there. They need to be there. But we have to keep in mind the ultimate goal, right? And that ultimate goal, it's very clear what that ultimate goal was. There's no two ways about it. So we have to understand that, okay, this is what the goal is. This is where, if I follow the process with complete faith, this is a goal that I can attain. But I shouldn't try to hide that standard or adjust it or ignore it like that. We have to always keep that in mind. sure, we're not at that level, that's fine. We admit that, but we should not be comfortable with where we are and think that standard's not important. We can go back to the spiritual world without becoming, celibates. That's not something that we should consider. So I also want to point out at this point, because early on, this was a very common misunderstanding. Just because someone is married, it doesn't mean they can't go back to the spiritual world. One might get this impression from here. Early on, it used to be a very common thing in the temples that only the sannyasis were going back to the spiritual world. All the householders were in Maya, they're fallen, and there's no way they can go back to the spiritual world, right? That's a very popular misconception back in the day. But married people can actually be celibate. Srila Prabhupada pointed this out. And this is actually what he expected of his followers, right? He called them grihasta brahmacharis, right? So I'll just read one quote where Srila Prabhupada refers to this. In the Perfection of Yoga, chapter 4, Srila Prabhupada writes, there are two kinds of brahmachari. One is completely celibate, and the other is grihasta brahmachari. That is to say, he has a wife, he does not associate with any other woman, and his relations with his own wife are strictly regulated. In this way, either by complete celibacy or restricted sex life, one's mind is kept from being agitated, right? So either way, Srila Prabhupada is considering this celibacy, whether you're not having sex at all or it's restricted. Now, when we say restricted, this is where people start bending the rules here, right? What is actually licit and what is illicit, right? So Srila Prabhupada's very clear about this. The only way to engage sex in Krishna's service is if you're doing it strictly for procreation, right? Which means there's a specific time that it is done. It's not done any other time. There's a specific consciousness that must be maintained. There's a specific obligation to the child that you're producing to bring them up in Krishna consciousness. It's a very detailed definition of what this is, right? So this is what illicit sex is. Anything outside of that, even within marriage, if it's for enjoyment, it is illicit, right? And so again, that's the standard. It doesn't mean that when we come to Krishna consciousness, we're going to be able to live that standard perfectly, but we should understand that that's the goal that we want to get to in order to properly understand Krishna, to properly place our love into Krishna and qualify ourselves to return to the spiritual world. At this point, I want to read an excerpt from this book here. It's a collection of essays from my Guru Maharaj, Srila Ravindra Swarup Prabhu. It's called Endless Love. Also, at one point, it was published under the name Encounter with the Lord of the Universe. And it's a collection of essays. And one of the essays is called Immortal Longings. And honestly, this verse and purport is basically, if you want an elaborate explanation of this verse and purport, this is an amazing essay to read the whole thing, but I'm just going to read parts of it due to time. Okay. So he writes, but sex for any other purpose. So we just talked about the purpose for what is actually licit, how you can dovetail sex in Krishna consciousness just for procreation. So, but sex for any other purpose, sex to exploit the body for enjoyment, to fuel the delusions of the ego, is the cause of death. Right? So this is what's known as a thesis statement. Right? And it's a heavy statement. But when you make a thesis statement, it's not supposed to be something that you immediately understand. It's usually something that it has to be explained further. Anytime someone makes a thesis, it's not just a simple thing. Oh yeah, okay, and everybody accepts it. So the thesis is sex for any purpose beyond procreation. So in other words, if even within marriage, if the purpose is to exploit the body for enjoyment, that is the cause of death, right? That's the thesis statement. Sex is death. Now it's going to be explained why that's there, because it seems like a jump. How is sex death? The cause of death, we talk about gun violence and diseases, and there's so many other things that we say are the cause of death. But this is saying that sex, illicit sex, that is the cause of death. But so this will be explained. Sex, more than anything else, fixes our false identification of ourselves with the body, rivets us into the flesh, and addicts us to material aggrandizement. Sexual desire can never be satisfied, for it grows by what it feeds on, right? And so we all have experience of this, whether we can recognize it in others or actually mostly recognize it in ourselves. We see that this is what's going on. The permanently frustrated desire causes a deep and abiding rage, which deepens our illusion. Right? So it's permanently frustrated because it can't be satisfied, as was previously mentioned. And it then causes rage, right? So Bhagavad Gita, Krishna pointed out, and it was Bhagavad Gita 3:37, Kama Esha Krodha Esha Rajo Guna Samodbhuva. Krishna told Arjuna, it is lust only, Arjuna, which is born of contact with the mode of passion and later transformed into wrath, and which is the all-devouring sinful enemy of this world. Right? So it's later turned to wrath because we're trying to enjoy something that cannot be enjoyed the way we want to enjoy it. So we get angry, right? So in his purport to that verse, 337, Srila Prabhupada says, when a living entity comes in contact with the material creation, his eternal love for Krishna is transformed into lust in association of the mode of passion. Or in other words, the sense of love of God becomes transformed into lust as milk in contact with sour tamarind is transformed into yogurt. Then again, when lust is unsatisfied, it turns into wrath. Wrath is transformed into illusion, and illusion continues material existence. Continuing on with the essay, the twin delusions of desire and hate, this is referring to Icha Dvesha, that's in Bhagavad Gita 7:27. The twin delusions of desire and hate drive us on through interminable bodily incarcerations, so birth after birth, hurtling us over and over into forms that fill us with fear, suffer the ceaseless onslaught of injury and disease, disintegrate while we still occupy them, and are destroyed, right? So birth after birth, we're put into these bodies, and even when we're in them, it's not, it's not pleasant, because while we're in them, they're actually disintegrating, right? They're not sustainable. We're reminded at every step that this is not a sustainable solution to our goal, right, which is love of Godhead. Continuing the essay. In reality, none of this happens to us, but we have erroneously identified ourselves with the body and have thereby taken these torments upon us, right? So all of these sufferings that are happening to us, they're not actually happening to us, they're happening to the body. And since we're identifying with the body, these feelings seem very real. These sufferings seem very real, right? Then here's where, so we've read the thesis, we've read some explanation. So now we're going to come back to the conclusion, which is basically a restatement of the thesis while explaining how one can actually understand it. This is my favorite part. Death is an illusion we have imposed upon ourselves by our desire to enjoy this world, right? So first he defines death. It's an illusion that we have imposed upon ourselves by our desire to enjoy this world, right? Because the soul is eternal. There is actually no death. For the soul, there is neither birth nor death at any time. He has not come into being, does not come into being, and will not come into being. He is unborn, eternal, ever existing, and primeval. He is not slain when the body is slain. It's Bhagavad Gita 2:20. So death is an illusion, right? And it's been imposed upon us by ourselves. Why? Because our desire to enjoy this world. So that's the definition of death. Now that we know what death is, let's find out what sex is. He continues. Sex is the essence of that desire, right? So the desire to enjoy the material world, the essence of that is sex. And then the conclusion, sex, therefore, is death. So the whole thing together, death is an illusion we have imposed upon ourselves by our desire to enjoy this world. Sex is the essence of that desire. Sex, therefore, is death. Right. So this we can understand this through today's verse and purport. I'm going to continue a little more on the essay, because then, basically one can come to that conclusion and say, well, yeah, but what do we do about this? What's the practical solution? So he continues, it is only right that we struggle against the sentence of death because we're eternal beings. It is only proper that we seek a life of uninterrupted and unending pleasure, uncompromised by shame or fear, because also not only are we eternal, we're also by nature full of bliss. So it's natural to seek out bliss. Continuing, it is only natural that we want to be whole and at one with ourselves, uncompromised by duality. The most deadly delusion is that sex is a way to these goals, for in fact, it is the greatest single impediment, right? And today's verse pointed that out. That is the greatest single impediment. It is the cause of our disease, which we embrace as the cure, right? We tend, especially in the age of Kali, especially in this age of sexual revolution, we tend to think that the way to tap into our pleasure is to unrestrictedly engage in sex life, whether it's gross or subtle, again. And we don't understand that when we're chasing this pleasure around, pouring oil on the fire, trying to extinguish it, it's actually keeping us from the true bliss, right? So again, from today's purport, Srila Prabhupada said that birth, death, old age, and disease are related to the material body. They have nothing to do with the spirit soul. But as long as the bodily attachment for sensual enjoyment is encouraged, the individual soul is forced to continue the repetition of birth and death on account of the material body, which is compared to garments subject to the law of deterioration. So another quote from this essay, Immortal Longings. In its original condition, because this is important for us to understand, in its original condition, the self, the soul, is filled with a ceaseless love for the supreme, all-attractive self. This love is constitutional, right? It's inherent. It cannot be removed. It's eternal. It is the self's very life, right? So this love, it's there. It's not something that we can suppress or repress. Therefore, when the self turns aside the proper object of his love, Krishna, that love is not annihilated, but it becomes transmuted or redirected. When the self contacts the material energy, his love for Krishna is transformed into lust, just as milk in contact with acid turns into curd. We read that from the purport of 337. So the erotic drive is indeed part of our essential makeup, right? So we shouldn't think, that this desire for sex is something that's alien to us. It's actually part of our eternal makeup. It cannot be taken away. It's just a perverted reflection of actual love. The erotic drive is indeed part of our essential makeup, but it is a transformation of what is in fact our love for Krishna. Desire, therefore, cannot possibly be annihilated, nor can it successfully be repressed or suppressed. However, it can be reverted to its original state. Yet, as long as we are impelled by the erotic drive, we take on a succession of bodies of matter. Right? So here's the solution then to the problem. We've understood that, okay, that feeling that we have to chase around bliss, that's natural. We're just looking for it in the wrong place. So we have to redirect that. Another excerpt. If we seize the chance of human consciousness, we can solve the problem of existence by cultivating knowledge of the self, become freed from the engagement in matter, and return to our pure existence in intimate eternal love with Krishna. Our return to our normal condition is engineered by Krishna, right? He wants us to go back to him. While we have forgotten him, he has not forgotten us. He has remained close by our side throughout all our wanderings in darkness and in pain, waiting for us to show the first flicker of a desire to abandon our illusory project of becoming the Supreme. When, in the hidden depths of our being, we start to yearn for Krishna and to regret our folly in turning away, Krishna immediately arranges for us to meet one of his self-realized representatives. This person tells us explicitly about the conditions of material existence, about our eternal nature, and about our relation with Krishna, thus reviving our latent knowledge. All right, so this is the solution. As soon as we have that glimmer of desire to place our love properly instead of trying to place it improperly in various different ways, trying to control and enjoy independently. When we put that love back to the proper object of love, Krishna, as soon as there's just a glimmer of that, Krishna, who is always there as Paramatma next to us, he notices that and he sends us someone who can explain this science to us, right? And as long as we're actually willing to follow, as long as we're willing and able to follow the steps with no compromise, then we can attain the supreme goal. Another excerpt. I'd love to read this whole essay. It's amazing. But Krishna is the supreme pure, and his association is purifying. We are qualitatively one with Krishna, and his association revives that original character, reawakens our native consciousness. Quickly, then, we begin to experience our eternal nature and taste the remarkable flavor of our natural love. As we do so, we lose interest in the material substitutes that used to attract us. Our lust becomes transformed back into love again. Thus, the revival of pure consciousness is based not on the repression or suppression of desires, but on its re-spiritualization, right? So again, we're not trying to have this strict vow of celibacy just to repress that and think that that's actually going to take us there. No, we're trying to re-spiritualize ourselves. We're trying to take that natural desire to enjoy and put it in its proper place to actually enjoy the reciprocational loving service of Krishna. Right? That's where the true bliss lies, the eternal bliss. Right? So I don't want to go too far over time. A few more important points from today's purport. Srila Prabhupada mentioned, any form of religious principles in which the followers are trained to pursue the vow of celibacy is good for the human being, because only those who are trained in that way can end the miserable life of material existence, right? So Srila Prabhupada is showing appreciation for any process that is actually promoting celibacy, because that is the only way to end material existence, right? It won't necessarily end it just by becoming celibate, but it needs to be there in order to actually attain the spiritual world. Then later, Srila Prabhupada says, for a transcendentalist, therefore, who at all wants to be promoted to the kingdom beyond material miseries, it is worse than suicide to deliberately indulge in sex life, especially in the renounced order. Sex life in the renounced order of life is the most perverted form of religious life, and such a misguided person can only be saved if by chance he meets a pure devotee. This is why it's very important not to prematurely take on the renounced order of life, right? If the desires are still there, the desires have to be dovetailed in Krishna's service, right? Somehow or other, one has to come to this conclusion, right? If we try to do this prematurely and fall down, that is the most perverted form of religious life, as Srila Prabhupada mentions. So we have to understand the concessions that are given, and we have to very maturely and properly put our faith in the system to actually make it to that higher standard. We shouldn't say, There are so many religionists who have been in the renounced order of life that have fallen down to sexual desire. So there's no way I'm going to attain it. If they couldn't do it, how could I? How could I ever hope to? That shouldn't be our mentality. Our mentality should be, this is the standard. Krishna says that it's possible by following this process. I'm going to follow this process, and I have the faith that it's going to get me there. I wanted to mention a little bit about Haridas Thakur. Actually, I still will. I'm just going to do it very quickly. So, junior Haridas, or Chota Haridas, as mentioned in the purport, was chastised by Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and it said in there, breaking his vow. Now, the situation is this. Chota Haridas, who was a very dear servant of Lord Chaitanya, had a very sweet voice and would always sing for Lord Chaitanya, and very much appreciated it. He was asked by another devotee who was preparing a lunch for Lord Chaitanya in Jagannath Puri. He was asked, hey, can you go to see Madhavi Devi? By the way, she's one of the 3.5 intimate associates of Lord Chaitanya. Lord Chaitanya, you couldn't count her as a fourth, you can count her as the 3.5, because Lord Chaitanya was a sannyasi. And so he couldn't have intimate association with a woman. So she's counted as half a person who he had very intimate association with. So Chota Haridas was asked to go to Madhavi Devi. She's elderly. She's a pure devotee. There was no inappropriate transaction between the two of them. None of them were trying to enjoy each other. But he was asked to go there and get some rice, and this very special type of rice, so that I can cook it for Lord Chaitanya. So that's all that happened. He went there. He asked, can I have this rice? And for Lord Chaitanya, and then he took it back. Most people say that's not a problem. Most devotees right now would say it, but even the devotees at the time thought Lord Chaitanya was being too hard on Chota Haridas, right? So when Lord Chaitanya was eating the rice, he said, oh, this is very nice rice. Where did it come from? Of course, he knew where it came from. He said, oh, it's from Madhavi Devi. Oh, who brought it from Madhavi Devi? Oh, that was Chota Haridas. So he continued eating the meal, but then later he told his servant, don't bring him here anymore. I can't stand to see his face. And the point is that for someone who has taken sannyas, someone who's in the renounced order of life, even just being alone in the association of a woman is wrong, because it sets a precedent that leads to a very dangerous path. It's called a slippery slope, right? Because if that was fine, and it was, Lord Nityananda said it was fine. It was a minor issue. They had all the devotees asked Paramananda Puri, who Lord Chaitanya respected very much. He's a senior renunciate in Jagannath Puri. They asked him, see if you can, encourage Lord Chaitanya to forgive Chota Haridas for this minor offense. But he wouldn't, right? So it's hard to wrap our heads around, but we see that if Lord Chaitanya would have allowed that to happen, if he didn't show this precedence, this example, that this sort of behavior cannot be tolerated, we would continue to make these exceptions, right? That was an exception. It wasn't actually an offense. But then if we consider that's not an offense, then in my service, yeah, I should also be able to associate with, I have to, in order to do my service, I have to associate with this lady or that lady. And I can say from personal experience, when I first moved into the temple, I was 18 years old. So I certainly was not detached from subtle sex desire. And so I did, in fact, use as an excuse service so that I could talk to certain ladies, right? And this is the danger. We see that, okay, if that's allowed, then people will just say, oh, no, this is for service. That's why this association is allowed. And Lord Chaitanya wanted to make sure that wasn't okay for someone that's in the renounced order of life, right? There were a few more quotes I wanted to read, but I want to just wrap this up with a conclusion. I highly recommend this essay. You can contact me. I can send you. The book is actually pretty difficult to get these days, but I can send you maybe a digital copy of the essay if you're interested. So the conclusion of today's discussion, today's verse purport, and the discussion about it, is that strictly following celibacy vows is absolutely mandatory for returning to the spiritual world. Absolutely. no way, there's no loophole, there's no way to get around that. Although there are concessions that are made, it is important to understand and strive for that high standard. Trying to change, adjust, or ignore the standard will only cheat ourselves and countless others. So not only are we cheating ourselves from getting into the spiritual world, we're cheating everyone else who's following our example, everyone else we're preaching to. So if we're trying to, in trying to make our movement more accessible, if we don't stress this high goal, then we're only doing a disservice, right? We're putting a bunch of people in the illusion that they can maintain these base desires and also attain the spiritual world. This has to be understood. We have to have faith that this process is powerful enough to make a seemingly unattainable goal and very easy to grasp. That's what this process does. We know this from Shastra, we know this from Guru, we know this from the Acharyas, and we have to put our faith in that. We actually have to understand that. And so we shouldn't be afraid to say, this is the goal. This is what we want to attain. This is where I am now. I'm not ready for that. So I live life in this way, but I'm gradually following the process so I can attain this goal. This is the proper way to understand this subject matter. And in that spirit, we have to acknowledge that presently seemingly unattainable goal and go through these steps to achieve it, right? It's the only thing that's worthy of endeavor. Right now, we do so many things to try to maintain our level of enjoyment or comfort or entertainment, right? We put forth so much endeavor to maintain these things that we know we're going to lose at the time of death. But this is something that's worth the endeavor. And the good news is, for those of us who, have experience of trying to get something through endeavor, but then failing, the good news is the endeavor isn't what gets us there. The endeavor isn't what gets us love of Godhead, right? The faith does. Krishna's mercy does. We talk about this during Kartik, that we need faith, we need mercy, and we need endeavor. These are the two things that we need to attain Krishna. So on our side, we have to put forth the endeavor. On Krishna's side, his mercy is always there. So we have to put forth that endeavor to show him that we actually want his mercy, that we actually deserve his mercy, and then we can grab onto it. So that's the conclusion. We have to understand that this is a mandatory prerequisite for going back to Godhead. And we can understand that, yes, I'm not there yet, but if we follow this process, we will get there. We shouldn't try to ignore it, disguise it, gloss it over in any other way, because if we do that, we're doing a huge disservice to our movement. So let me stop there and see if there are any questions, comments. I know this was long and this is a very important topic, and it's one that's often misunderstood. We tend to basically accept whatever level we're on. We tend to accept that whatever we're doing is it, that this is what I can do. This is what I'm comfortable with, and it's enough, right? But we have to understand that no, it's enough for now, but we have to keep going. It's a process, and so we have to be clear about that. Otherwise, we're cheating ourselves. So, any questions or comments? Everyone agrees. That's good.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, Danatran.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. It was very nice, Prabhu. You are clear about everything. I don't have any question, but it was so nice.
Okay.
So we get to know everything. Like we are also very clear for everything.
Okay.
Yeah. So if we ever, preach, so we should be clear. How you said, like, if we don't be clear, then we are cheating ourselves and we are cheating to others too. That was the main thing.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for explaining so nicely.
Thank you. The important thing is the balance. The concessions do have to be presented because, like I said, people are coming to Krishna consciousness in very many different levels with very different attachments. And so concessions have to be there, but they shouldn't be presented as this is it. This is all you have to do. This is what you do now, but eventually we're coming to this goal, and this is the process that will take you there, and it'll make it easy to attain. We just can't leave out that part because that's the important part. Yes, thank you.
Very important.
Uh,
Thank you, Kari. Thank you so
thank you.
much.
Thank you. Anything else? Okay. Bob, if you can send me an email. It's Charuchandra, the same way my name is spelled under there, at me.com. Then I'll have your email address and I can send you that. And anyone else. Charuchandra at me.com. Anyone else? Okay, looks like we can stop here. Thank you all for listening and for joining. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Anchakalpatribhyascha kripa sindhubhya cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavibhyo namo namaha. Anantakoti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai.
Yeah.
Oh, Bob, you did send me your email. Okay, let me copy it before I close this. Nope, I can't do that. I'll screenshot it. Okay. Hare Krishna.